If you could give yourself one piece of advice to your 21-year-old self, what would it be?
If you keep giving your all, your gifts will make room for you. The only solution to long-term happiness is to get outside yourself. The human mind will always find something to be concerned about, pissed off about, worried about. But when you're serving, you're not there. Find something you care about more than yourself, because that's what's going to be the secret to your growth and your aliveness. Whether it's your family, it's your friends, it's your company, it's a nonprofit thing to you, it's a mission for you. And if you've got that kind of drive, you're going to keep growing. And if you keep growing, you have plenty to give. And if you keep giving, you're going to have a meaningful life.
Tony, thanks for being here. Welcome to In Search of Excellence.
Great to meet you.
What an honor.
Thanks, Andy.
So let's start with our parents, born in North Hollywood, raised in Azusa, and your dad, Boris, underground parking attendant. Mom, Nikki, drug addict, used to beat the shit out of you, poured dishwasher detergent down your throat until you threw up, and chased you out of the house with a knife. Tell us what that was like as a kid growing up, and the dichotomy of that, of you saying that she was a great mom.
Well, the dichotomy is she really is a good human being, but when people get altered chemically, they become somebody else. And I wouldn't have called her a drug addict, but she drank alcohol pretty excessively. And when she mixed it with like Valium and other things, she got very violent. And I have a younger brother, 5 years younger, younger sister, 7 years younger. And so I had to kind of be the mom and dad a little bit. It made me grow up very early. But a lot of the best qualities of my life came from my mom, to give a fair picture. Otherwise, people just generalize. She was a very loving person. She cared for her friends very deeply. So when she was sober, it was a very different experience. And that's why personally, I never drank. I don't have any judgment of people who do, but I just never wanted to alter because I was in a family where multiple people did that. My natural father also drank as well, but, he had an interesting life. He was a parking attendant, as you said. He's underground all day long. It was before he had machines, and he'd sit there all day long and make change with people and never move for 40-something years. And so my mom kind of despised that. So I think she instilled that in me. I don't want to be that way. I need to become more successful. But I think the truth is, as I look back on it, if my mom had been the mother I wanted her to be, I truly wouldn't be the man I'm proud to be, because she made me a practical psychologist. I had to learn her moods and her emotions, how to manage and how to shift it. So, we could manage those times without it becoming violent or difficult. At the same time, just to put it in balance, she pushed me to do things I never would have done on my own, and built a lot of my muscle, so to speak, psychological muscle, because she was very demanding and those things happen. And then there was a third part, which I walked in with, which is I just have a love for people. I was like, when I was a little kid, I was trying to do things for strangers all the time. My mom tells people stories. One of the stories she used to tell people is like, what's Tony really like? Has he always been this way? And she said, I can remember when I sent him next door to the liquor store, because I lived in this liquor store. She was pregnant with my brother, so I was probably 5 years old. And I sent him over to get some milk and bread. And it took forever to come back. And I came back with no milk and bread and no money. And we had no money. And she said, what happened? I said, well, there's a poor boy there. So I gave him the money. And she said, we're poor. That's the story of the process. So I think a combination of reaction to the environment, but not wanting to be a victim, not being willing to settle, that shifted me. And then I have 4 different fathers of radically different role models. And Jim Robbins, who adopted me, the name I carry, was the one that I was most close to, even though he was my natural father. He was a semi-pro baseball player. And, I developed a lot of moxie, because to have love with him, it was really through sports. So initially it was really through sports that all that developed for me.
So many of us have life-changing moments. We're going to talk about many of yours on the show today, but one of them happened when you were 11 years old. There's a knock on the door. Can you tell us about the delivery guy?
Yes.
And then the 3 decisions that you thought about that came out of that huge event?
I was 11, and we had, my fathers were good men, but they, variously got unemployed at various times. And when they're unemployed, my mom didn't work, so we had no income. We had some food stamps. So we had Thanksgiving when I was 11, we had no food. We weren't going to starve. We had saltine crackers and peanut butter. But when everybody else is having a turkey dinner, it feels a bit depressing. And my mom and dad were screaming at each other and saying things that, I didn't want my brother or sister to hear. And once you say them, you can't take them back. And then my life has changed, because knock on the door, I go there. There's this big guy standing there with 2 bags of groceries, 1 in each hand. And he had already set down a pot with a frozen turkey on the ground. And he said, is your father here? And I'm like, just one moment. I was like so excited, like little boy at Christmas. And like, this is going to change everything. My dad's going to be happy. Mom's going to be so happy. So I went to my dad, there's a guy at the door for you. He says, you answer it. I said, I did answer it. He's for you. What does he want? I said, I don't know. He said, he can only talk to you. And then I'm sitting there waiting with a, internal joy. And he opens the door, sees the man, does not let the man even speak, and just says, we don't accept charity, and slams the door on the guy. But the man holding the groceries had leaned forward a little bit, so it hit his shoulder and bounced off his shoulder, which made my dad even more mad. He said, sir, he said, listen, somebody knows you're I'm just the delivery guy. Somebody knows you're having a tough time, and everybody has tough times, at times. They want you to have a great Thanksgiving. My father said, we don't accept charity, and he pushed again. Because the guy leaned in, his leg and foot had gone in, so it hit his toe and popped open again. And so now my dad's even more aggravated. And then the guy said something I thought the guy was going to get, my dad was going to punch him in the face. And he wasn't mean about it. He actually had a soft, gentle voice about it. And he saw me and he said, sir, don't let your family, suffer because of your ego.
Great line.
And my father's face, I remember like yesterday, the veins in the side of his neck popping, his face beet red. And I'm waiting for him to punch him, and then his shoulders just dropped. I'll never forget. He grabbed the groceries, threw them on the table, didn't say thank you, slammed the door. And I was shocked, and then I was sad, and I didn't know how to process, why isn't he happy? Or why, we're gonna have a great Thanksgiving now, But my father had always said, strangers, nobody cares about us. And I thought we lived in a very wealthy community. It's actually very lower middle class, but we were the poorest of the poor, literally across the railroad tracks. And that's where the people went in that particular community that really had nothing. And so it looked like nobody cared. But I had different evidence that day. And I remember, I didn't figure it out that day, but I don't know, about 3 years later, I was probably 14, 15 years old. And I became obsessed with understanding human behavior at that stage already. I was already starting to read books and absorb things at that stage. I took a speed reading class and said, I'm going to read a book every day. I didn't do that. But in 7 years, I read 700 books in human development, psychology, physiology. But I started thinking about like what made that happen. And I realized there's 3 decisions, as you noted, that you're making right now, your audience is making right now. When I say we're making them, we may not be making them consciously. Most of the time, they're unconscious. So you get the same result over and over again. If it's a good result, it's a good result. Most people, not so great result, that's what it is. And those 3 decisions are, number 1, you have to decide what to focus on. Now, again, if you don't think about it, you'll be triggered by the environment or you'll be triggered by your habits. But whatever you focus on, that's your experience of life. I always tell people, you don't experience life. You experience the life you focus on. Right now, you could focus on something and get yourself pissed off. If it's not in your own life, it could be about other people, right? You could find total joy in this moment or gratitude if you focus on something else. So we don't experience life. It's what we focus on. And what we focus on, we feel, even if it's not true. So if you think somebody is taking advantage of you, you get all angry, and later on you find out they did and you feel like an idiot, right? But when you were focused on it, it was real to you. So focus equals reality to the individual, even though it's not reality in actuality. Or a simpler way is focus equals feeling. So I thought about what did I focus on that day and what did my dad focus on that day? And it was so easy because my dad said it under his breath over and over again. His focus was he had not fed his family, right? My focus is there was food. What a concept. I thought that was awesome. But the biggest difference is the minute you focus on something, the second decision you have to make, your brain makes is, what does this mean? Is this a threat or is this an opportunity, right? Your brain is doing that constantly. And so is this person disrespecting me? Is this person challenging me? Is this person coaching me? Is this person loving on me? If you think they're disrespecting you, you're going to have a very different emotional response than if you think they're loving on you. Right? And whatever emotion you feel controls the third decision, which is, what should I do? If you're pissed off, you're going to have a very different decision than if you're feeling grateful, obviously, right? So the meaning is what really changed my life that day. Because my father's meaning, I know what it was also because he said it over again. He hadn't fed his family and he was worthless. And what he decided to do is leave our family shortly after that, which was at the time, I thought the worst event of my life because I loved him so much. But my meaning is what changed my life. It's why I'm here today. The meaning my brain came up with is that strangers care. Strangers do care. Somebody we don't even know doesn't even want credit. And they saw we're in need and they helped us. That changed my entire world perspective. And what I decided to do is someday I'm going to do that for other people. And so I promised myself someday I'd feed 2 families. I'd double the impact. So when I was 17, I had very little money. I was just getting started in a little tiny business. I went to this grocery store and outside of Venice, California. And I went up to the manager and I said, listen, I told him the story. I got fed when I was a kid. I want to go feed 2 families. I got a limited budget. How about you give me a discount? I'm not doing this for me. And the guy gave me 10% off, and I thought, cheap bastard, but I took the 10%. And I took 2 grocery bags or rollers, and I filled them with enough for 2 or 3 days of food for 2 families. And then I called a local church and said, and near the barrio area, in that area that I knew people were suffering. And I said, do you have a family that really needs food, but probably be too proud to get it? That was kind of the model of my family. I'm sure we could have found food if we'd gone and asked for it somewhere, but we weren't going to do that. And so they gave me 2 names. And so I loaded up all the food. I borrowed a friend's van. And then I turned around and I put on an old t-shirt and jeans because I saw my dad responded. So I was like, I'm not going to be thanked. I'm just going as the delivery guy. And then I wrote a note, said, this is a gift from a friend. Please have a beautiful Thanksgiving. We all have tough times at times. Hope this makes your Thanksgiving better. And someday, please, if you can do well enough, do this for one other family, and put love a friend. And then I realized where I was going. They may not speak Spanish, so I had a friend write it in Spanish on the back. So I show up at the house. I shouldn't say house, this little apartment. And I knock on the door, the first place. And this woman about this tall comes up to about my chest, looks up at me, sees the groceries, and screams. And I'm like, oh, no. And she grabs my head and pulls me down to her and starts kissing my cheek. I said, no, I'm delivery boy, delivery. And I said, oh, and I remembered I had the note. So I reached the hand of the note and I flipped it over. She saw it in Spanish and she read it and she started to cry. And then she grabbed and started kissing me again. I said, no, delivery boy. She goes, no, gift of God. I'm trying not to cry. And then I said, well, where do I put these groceries? And there's a tiny little room, right? The table's right there. And she points. And so I go to put it there. And then I hear these screams. And then all of a sudden, when one boy hits me, one boy hits the other, 4 kids. And it turned out that I found out afterwards that her husband had left them 3 days before Thanksgiving with no money and no food. It's like not the exact same situation as mine, but so close it was ridiculous. It's like, talk about grace. And so, the kids got all excited. So I had them come out to the van and help me bring more stuff in. And when they saw the pumpkin pie, it was like they were over the top. And then it was time to leave. And this one little boy would not let go of my leg. He was so cute and he was so just wonderful. But I had to go. I had to go to the next house. I didn't speak Spanish. So I turned to the lady and I said, Feliz Navidad, Merry Christmas. It's Thanksgiving. Then she started to laugh. She'd been crying, now she's laughing. And I gave them all hugs and I went to leave and I got in the van and I'll never forget, I was putting the thing in reverse as my buddy's van. I didn't really know how to do the gears properly. And I looked in the rearview mirror and on the porch for the 4 boys and the mom, they're grinning from ear to ear. Mom's crying and smiling simultaneously. And I started crying uncontrollably. And I was like, why am I crying? This is such a beautiful moment. And trying to get the thing in gear. And I couldn't see I was crying so hard. And then I realized today, my worst day became my best day. That if I had not suffered like that as a child, would I be there to help this family? And the answer is, well, I believe I'm a good person. Probably not. And so the next year I fed 4 families. I was hooked. And then it was 8. And then I had a little company. I got my employees involved. Then I got a bigger company. Then I eventually got to 4 million people, 2 million from my foundation, 2 million from me every year. And then I was doing this book, Money Master the Game, where I interviewed Ray Dalio, Carl Icahn, Warren Buffett, 50 of the smartest financial people in the world. And I'm reading these multi-billionaires and I see that the government has cut food stamps, they call it the SNAP program now, by $6 billion, I think was the number. It basically means every family that needs food has to go out with 1 week a month without food, unless people like you and I in the private sector step up. So I called my foundation and I said, how many people I fed in my lifetime? I didn't know the total number. And they said 42 million. I was like, wow, I was really excited and proud about that. But I thought, what if I blew that number through the roof? What if I did in 1 year as much as I did in my whole life? And I did 50 million meals. And I was like, what if I did 100 million meals? And I was like, what if I did 100 million meals for 10 straight years, provided 1 billion meals? Now that is an exciting outcome. And so I did. I teamed up with Feeding America. They distributed the food and I did it in 8 years. And then it didn't stop there because I'm doing another billion, but because it hasn't got problems, not gone away, but I'm looking for sustainability. And then I was working, I was in UAE and MBS I got to meet him and developed sort of relationship with him, friendship. And one day he called me up and he said, come to lunch with me. I have somebody I want to introduce you to, who's the only other person I know feeding as many people as you are. And it was Governor Beasley, who was the head of the World Food Program. He won the Nobel Prize for feeding people there for the UN. And so we decided to join forces about 1.5 years ago and said, look, normally 80 million people are at risk every year of starvation in this world. It's terrific. A child dies every 15 seconds of hunger. It's insane. This year, it's 350 million, and no one's talking about it because the news cycle is so short. Everybody focuses on everything else. There are 11 nations in Africa that the breadbasket for Africa is the Ukraine. So there's nothing coming out because of the war. The WF doesn't want people using fertilizer, but 50% of the world's food supply comes from fertilizer, and most of it comes from Russia, which was shut down. So the price of fertilizer went through the roof. So there are 11 nations where people are on the verge of starvation. No one's doing anything about it. So I said to him, how many meals would we need? We need a sustainable solution. How many years to get to sustainability? How many meals would we need? He said, I don't know, 20, maybe 50, 60 billion. I said, let's do a 100 billion meal challenge. I said, I did a 100 billion meal. I did a billion meals. All I need is 99 more people like me or organizations. And I said, I wasn't a billionaire when I started, I grew as I contributed more, And so we did that, and it didn't turn out very fast. I remember going to this one man who's a good friend of mine, who's very generous. And when I did my first billion meals, he contributed to it. And he said, what you doing now? I said, I'm doing this 100 billion meal challenge, right? Over 10 years. And I'm looking for people to do 100 million a year for 10 years. And he goes, Tony goes, how much would that be? I said, it's about $100 million. It's like 10 cents a meal. And he said, $100 million. He said, I said, yeah, but it's over 10 years, And he says to me, that's beyond my pay grade. He's worth $20 billion plus. So I was like, oh my God, this is not going to work. So without boring you with the details, I altered my approach. And we announced just 2 weeks ago, we hit the first 30 billion meals in 2 years. And quite frankly, we already have commitment now. I haven't announced it yet for 60 billion meals. We'll be at 60 by the end of this year. So we're going to blow through the 100 billion meals. But the point is, would I have ever done that if I was a well-fed child? If I had been totally nurtured? Again, I'd like to believe I would. I'm a good person, but I don't know if I'd had that much drive. So I really believe everything happens for a reason, including what went on with my mom. And I honor what happened in my life as opposed to be a victim. And I try to encourage other people to do the same thing. I never even told anybody about the story of my mom until after she passed. And I was in New York with a group of young Hispanic and African-American children who only had single mothers. And I was talking about biography is not destiny, and you can make different choices. And I'm looking at them, I can mind read. They're looking at this tall white guy who's wealthy. So I told them the whole story, not the ones I gave you, the details. They were crying their eyes out. I was crying my eyes out. And I realized sometimes it's valuable to share that with people. But my overall theme is don't settle and don't be a victim in this process. What if everything in your life happened for a reason? What if there was a higher purpose, but it's your job to find it? I believe life is always happening for me, not to me, but it doesn't always look that way. So I got to dig, I got to find, and sometimes it takes it. I don't know, in your life, have you got any experiences where you went through that were brutal, that were painful, that you'd never want to go through again, but maybe 5-10 years later, you look back on it and go, man, I'm so glad that happened. I wouldn't want to go through it, but made me so much stronger, made me care more. Can you relate to that in some way?
Yeah, bullies, stuttered as a kid. Yeah, brutal.
Yeah, but it made you stronger, it made you care more, it made you be a different person. Look at the emotion in you even now when you think about it. You're near tears just even thinking about it. So I think it's important for people to realize that if they go back and really look at their life, if they don't go on drugs and alter their state, if you alter your state, you'll never come up with a better meaning. But if you stay off drugs and you stay straight and you push for it, sooner or later, you're going to find there is a benefit that far exceeds the pain you went through. And I don't want to see anybody suffer. The reason I do what I do is I suffered so much, I don't want everybody else to suffer. So I've spent a lifetime looking at tools to help people break those patterns, master their body, their emotion, their relationship, their finances, the areas of life that matter.
When your mom kicked you out with a knife, you were depressed. She kept your 86 Volkswagen.
No, it was a 1960 Volkswagen.
60 Volkswagen.
It should have
You were
been
in yard for 40 hours a week you were making. She kept it.
Yeah.
In the rain, you slept on a hill. Then you slept in a friend's laundry room.
Yeah.
And then you read a book called The Power of Believing by Claude Bristol. Then you went
The
on,
Magic of Believing by Claude and Bristol, yes.
the Magic of Believing. And you went on to read 700 books. What was so inspiring about that book? Can you tell us about what you were writing on the mirror as you were reading that book?
Sure, you've done your homework. It's beautiful. I saw that radical preparation is a big part of your life. Mine too. When she kicked me out, she wasn't going to stab me and kill me. I wasn't worried about dying, but I wasn't going back in that house. And so I did sleep on the hill, and then it rained. So it's like that plan's out. And then,
You just slept there in the rain?
No, I got under the tree and froze. And I finally just went in and I knocked on the door of a friend who was a girl, not a girlfriend. And but her family really cared about me. And I said, can I sleep in your laundry room? So that's where I was. So I I don't know, $12 to my name or $13, whatever. And I just took a little bit of money, got on a bus, and I went to this bookstore that I had remembered because I'd run 13 miles on my 13th birthday. I had this obsession I was going to push myself. And so I remembered this bookstore. So I went there and I just was guided to this book, The Magic of Believing. And all it really taught was the power of belief. Belief controls everything. Everything you do is based on your belief, but it showed how to program your beliefs by conditioning them, by repetition, by what I'd call incantations as opposed to affirmations. Affirmations, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy. Your brain goes, bullshit, I'm not happy. But if you use your body and your voice and every ounce of you is congruently speaking that over and over again, it basically hypnotizes you into owning that experience. And so I used to write on the mirror in the laundry room, only a loser is depressed, which is not true. But I knew I wasn't a loser, so I used that as the leverage. I'm not going to be depressed because I was so depressed feeling. And I had all these affirmations I would do, and I go on runs, and I do every day and every way I'm getting stronger and stronger, and I would just program this nervous system of mine until I could really be in a position where I felt like I could succeed, and it worked. It produced tremendous change in me, but it didn't stop there. As you said, I'd started reading before that, but I just got reignited to read, and reading was my escape, but it was also my transformation. I escaped the whirlwind as I entered Emerson's essays, and I'd read a lot of autobiographies, especially because when you read an autobiography, you're reading the words of that incredible human being. So you're thinking their thoughts. And if you do that for days or weeks or whatever the case may be, you start to take that on. It's like if you want to play the piano and you can mess around on your own, but if you're smart, you learn other people's music and all of a sudden you do some amazing things. But after a while, you play it enough, you learn enough patterns that now you become the creator. Now you start to create your own patterns. And that's pretty much what happened for me with these books. And then also events. I went to seminar after seminar. I had no money. I didn't have money for my rent, but I go invest in a seminar because I'll never be able to pay for this until I change what's going on in me. And then I was also, because it was all the money I had, it was such a big investment. I wrote down, the guy said, I wrote down blah, man, I didn't miss a word. I didn't get up to pee. And I was obsessed with using what I learned because I had to, because I'd given up all the money I had to do it. And so that, I think some people, it's easy to do things and so they don't retain it. But for me, I was obsessed with getting the result.
We all have a lot of big moments in your life. Again, I want to go through yours because I think it's so much about your story. When you were 17 years old, you're working at Glendora High School as a janitor and helping move people on the weekends. And there was a friend of your family's who was a landlord, and very awkward conversation ensued where he said, my parents said, hey, you're such a loser. How are you so successful? So tell us about Jim Rohn and the influence you had on your life and the question that you asked the landlord, and he said, no fucking way, I'm not doing that. You do it yourself.
Well, I had to help support my family because we didn't have enough money for food. So I'm going to school and I kept 2 different jobs as a janitor because I could work in the middle of the night and they didn't pay you by the hour. They paid you by the result. So I could do 2 banks in the middle of the night, do a great job, and take the buses home and contribute. And then on the weekends, I would try to find something to do also because you didn't have to do the banks then. And my mom and dad knew this man who, as my dad's words were, used to be such a loser. Now he's so successful. And I wonder what happened to him. And all he was he was buying properties, fixing them up and flipping them in Orange County, California in the 1970s, 1977. And the market was exploding. So he was doing very well. So he was very efficient in his workforce to move things. And so he always hired a high school student. And I had been 5'1" in my sophomore year, and I got a tumor in my brain. No one knew that's why. And I grew 10 inches in a year. So I was like, get that big strapping guy. We'll do this. So I come and I'm a hard worker. And after 2 days of working my guts out, he's like, you're the hardest working guy I've ever met. He goes, I'm really impressed. Let me take you to lunch. So he takes me to lunch and he starts asking questions. I said, I want to ask you some questions. I said, my dad, and I wasn't trying to be harsh or funny. It's just when you're a kid, you just don't realize. I said, my dad said you should be such a loser. Now you're so successful. Like, how'd you do that? He was taken back, obviously. So John said, what? And he goes, it's probably pretty accurate about me. I said, well, what changed you? And he said, I went to a seminar. I never even heard the word seminar before. I said, what's a seminar? He sits where a man who has become incredibly successful over decades takes all he's learned in the decades and tries to compress it into a few hours or a few days and save you all that trial and error learning. I said, well, that's fascinating. I said, so how long is the seminar? He goes, it's 3.5 hours. I said, well, how much is it? And he said, $35. It'd be like $250 in today's dollars, right? Inflation. And I was making $40 a week. So I said, wow, that's expensive. I said, can you get me in? And he's like, yeah. but you say anything more? And I said, well, will you? And he said, no. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, because you won't value it if you don't pay for it. I said, no, I'm on my own. I've been sleeping in my car. I'm working as a janitor. I'm telling him the whole story, right? He goes, I don't hear the story. He said, if you're really committed, you'll go there. Or he said, learn on your own experience and take 10 or 20 or 30 years or maybe never figure it out. So I remember I like sweating bullets over this decision. Do I do a week's pay for this 1 3-hour thing, right? And I was like, oh my God. And then I went down there. I had graduated to a 1968 Volkswagen. This my mom had gotten the other one, Baja Bug. I pulled up in front of the nice hotel in Orange County, California, and gave it threw the keys to the valet. You turn my engine off and it usually had a little explosion. I was wearing a blue leisure suit, which is what people wore in those days, that I got in the thrift store. Fake gold chain, but I was ready to rock and roll, baby. And I went in, talked my way, and a guy had set this thing up so I could get in. And I sat in that seminar, and I'd read so many books that when Rohn was speaking, I would finish some of his phrases. And you're at a round table. I was somewhat disruptive without meaning to be, but I was so enthusiastic. And then during a break, I went up to Jim Rohn and told him the story about, how I've been doing all this stuff and I wanted to come to work for him. And he's like, young man, if you want to come work for me, you have to go through all my programs. And, it was in those days, $1,200. It'd be like, $12,000 today, $10,500, I think is the translation. So I didn't have that kind of money. I'm sleeping in my car in an old trench coat I got at the thrift store. I'm working as a janitor. I'm, trying to keep everything going. And I said, I tried to tell him my story. And he said, no, I don't want to hear all that. He said, I'm not your banker. So I said, you could loan me the money and then I'll go get these great results and I'll tell everybody that you helped me do this, right? He had this whole plan. And he goes, no, I'm not your banker. He goes, you know what? If you want to come to work with me, you have to have the money by Saturday. And he said, everybody gets what they have to have. Some people have to survive. Some people have to succeed. Decide which one you are. And he walked away. And I was pissed off. I was like, he's an asshole. I mean, I'm struggling. He's rich. I'm willing to pay for it. I just want him to finance it, And then after bitching in my head about him for a while, another part of my brain started going, he's right. I was like, he's right, what? He's right. You've always got what you had to have, but you haven't had to have much. There hasn't been many musts for me, And so I was like, okay. So I went to banks thinking banks will loan you money when you need it, which of course, as I'm sure they only loan you money if you don't need it, So I went to 4 banks in a row, turned down, and I'm running out of time. So I'm outside the Bank of America in West Covina, California, a place called Citrus Avenue. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I was getting myself like pumped up physiologically. I know what I was doing now, but I was getting in this really strong state. So I go in there and convince somebody. I walked in, I looked for somebody who looked persuadable. And there's this kind looking woman, kind eyes. I thought she'll understand. So I walked up to her with all the energy I had and shook her hand, probably shook it off and said, I'm Tony Robbins. I'm here today to borrow $1,200. I don't want that money to repair something. I don't want it for a vacation. I want it so I can attend a seminar. And she had this weird look on her face, like I'm not getting through to her. And she said, well, I appreciate your passion. I said, I want to go. I don't just want to go for me. I'm going to learn how to manage my time and this and that, how to lead and blah, blah. And I said, and I'm going to go help hundreds of thousands of people. That was the goal I had at that time. And she said, okay, young man, well, let me see your application, settle down. And she goes, I appreciate your intensity and passion. And so she's reading it and she sees my address is on Citrus Avenue. It's a commercial street that goes through 4 cities. There's no apartments on it. So she says, Citrus Avenue. She said, where's your apartment on Citrus Avenue? I said, well, I don't really have an apartment. I have kind of a mobile home. She said, a mobile home? So I told her the truth. I'm sleeping in my car at 24 hours between Denny's and 7-Eleven. They don't make me move. I talk to the mailman. He gives me my mail because he understands what I'm going through. So if you send it there, I'll get it. And her eyes are getting like this. And then she says, so you want the bank to loan you money and we'll send the bill to the 7-Eleven and you'll be in your mobile car sleeping? She goes, and then she goes, and you're 17 years old. I said, what does that matter? She goes, you can't sign a contract till you're 18. I said, I'll be 18 soon. She said, how soon? I said, how soon do I have to be 18? I said, I'll be 18 in 2 weeks. She goes, well, probably that. I just don't think the bank's going to loan it to you. I was like, no, you understand. I got to do this. I got even more passionate. And she said, listen. And she looked at me and she said, you're serious about this, aren't you? I said, as serious as a heart attack. I'm going to use everything I learned. I'm going to do all these things. And she said, I've never met anybody quite like you. She said, if you look me in the eye and swear to me, I will never have to come looking for you because I'm not going to 7-Eleven or Denny's. I will do everything I can to get the bank to help you. But if they won't, I'll loan you the money. But you better take this seriously. And I jumped across the desk, kissed her. She wasn't ready for that stuff. And I said, I always tell people you gave my start. And that's why I've always told the story. And her name was Mrs. Williams. And she got to make a loan with the money, though. She didn't have to do it. I don't know how she did. Maybe she co-signed. I don't know. But I took $1,200, which just makes me emotional even now remembering it. And all the money in the world was more expensive than the car I was sleeping in, right? You know? And I went to Jim Rohn's seminar, and I met a man there named Mike Keyes, who's still my friend today, 45 plus years later. And he had just a little bit more money than me. And he said, look, stay in my hotel. You don't stay in your car. And we were both pretty broken. There were a lot of very wealthy people over there learning from him. But because of that, like I said, it's like we were writing every word. I didn't go to the bathroom and everything. At one point, I figured every word was worth like 3 cents or some ridiculous thing. But I was so committed. And then Jim Rohn, years later, I spoke at his funeral. He's a beautiful man. He would start his seminars and say, you know, every time I get up here, I want to do a good job because you never know who's in your audience. And he'd tell the story about this kid who's sitting in his room and shouting out answers. And he goes, you know what it was? Tony Robbins. And today he serves people all around the world. And then he also would tell a story about Mike, the two guys that were the most broke, because we probably applied it as much or more than most people would. So that's where my whole start began.
We all have a aha moment where we say, okay, someone tells us that we're special. And you had an interesting teacher named Mr. Cobb your sophomore year in high school. Again, I think a lot of guys all have their ultimate crush. You had one, a senior cheerleader in high school. What did he tell you and took you aside where he thought you were getting in trouble, and instead it just opened up your whole world?
He was a very kind of right-wing, straight-laced guy that taught speech. And I get in a speech class and I screwed around. I was pretty humorous. And so I would take over the class to some extent. And the reason I took over the class is there was a senior song leader, cheerleader, Nancy Coleman, who I was totally in love with, but I was not in her league. But I would get her attention over everything. You know, the main football players there, I'd humiliate the guy and tease him. I was crazy in those days. And so after class, Mr. Cobb said, Mr. Robbins, you need to stay. I need to speak to you. And I was like, oh, shit, I'm busted. And I sat down, and it wasn't what I expected. He goes, you know why I've asked you to sit down here with me today after class? And I was like, yeah, I think I do. He goes, why? I said, well, you know, and I started to say what I did. He goes, no. He goes, I've been a teacher for 30 years, 30 plus, I believe it was. And he said, I've never seen anybody stand up and capture every kid in this room's attention when he speaks. He said, it's unbelievable what you do. And I was like flabbergasted. I didn't have any reference for that whatsoever. And he said, I think you have a gift. And he said, I know more about your story than you probably think I do. He knew about my mom and things like that. And he goes, I think I found a speech that embodies who you are. And it was called The Will to Win. And it was all about, the only way I made it to that point in my life was pure will. And he goes, I want you to read this, memorize this, and compete in persuasive oratory. And I was like, I'm not, you know, you have to be a junior to do it. He goes, I don't care. I'm going to get you in. And so I read this speech. I was very emotional reading it. It was so tapped into my own story of who I am. And I got up and I took first place and another first place, another first place. And I mean, I didn't win every single one, but I won about 80% of the time as I win these competitions of the year. And so that developed that skill set in me. And then I decided to run for student body president, even though I wasn't the most popular kid in school, but I did it differently. I went to everybody and found out what they wanted and came back and told them the truth. I don't think this could be done. I think that could be done. And, you know, I won. And so it taught me that you didn't have to be popular, that you could, if you told the truth and served, you'd get through to anybody, because I beat the most popular kids in school by far. So it was kind of another launching pad. Well, each of those things stack on each other to make you start to believe that something more is possible.
You're starting your seminars. You're doing some with Jim. He's letting you speak at 20 years old. I think your first seminar. And there was someone there who was basically criticizing you. Tony doesn't know shit. He's really not doing anything. And then there was and he's basically saying, hey, I've got a client that has a snake phobia. He said, I can cure it. But the better one that I think a lot of people would be more interested in, and I think you could create a whole new business. I know you've done well. I think people have said Tony is now a billionaire, as you were able to give a woman an orgasm who had never had one in her life before.
Without touching her.
Well, without touching her. So, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of guys listening out there saying, holy shit, Tony, you got to write a book about this. And then there's a bunch of women out there who are not sexually fulfilled, where I think there'd be a 50-50 audience there on that one.
Oh, no, I made my career by taking challenging psychiatrists originally and saying, give me your worst patient, I'll handle them in an hour, who'd been working for 5 or 6 or 7 years. I started that in Vancouver. And And it became kind of my calling card. Now today, I train psychologists and psychiatrists. They study my work and they get continuing education credits. Kind of crazy. But in those days, I was angry to see somebody spend 5-6 years at something that I had learned techniques that truly could wipe it out in less than an hour, sometimes 15 minutes. And so I use that. I take somebody like snake phobia and I'd bring it out, they'd freak out, and I'd, at the end, wrap the snake around them, and people would be like, holy shit, this is amazing. But yeah, one of the more dramatic ones was a woman who had an orgasm. But women are
Did you demonstrate that in the seminar? No, right?
I did without touching her, and the people were just, guys are like, can you teach me how to do that when I'm tired? That kind of thing, But women are very different than men physiologically in that area. The man, you can be, I always say, women need a reason to make love. Men just need a place, So, a woman, if she is not emotionally safe, secure, there's a whole series of elements that allow her to be able to let go and experience an orgasm. And so I was just able to guide her to that. But it became, people talked about it a lot. It became a big piece. But then I did things for like the Army. I took a training program that they've been doing since World War I on training people in pistol shooting. And I told the general I could take any training program we have, cut the training time in half, and increase the competency. And he said, you're crazy. I said, no, I'm expensive. We negotiated. I went through a year's worth of top secret clearance. And then I did a whole series of things for the Army. And I cut the training program by 3 days out of 4, 1.5 days versus 4 days, and qualified 100% of the people instead of 70% of the people. And so that opened up doors. I got to do coding. I got to do other things of that nature. And then I started working with sports teams. And then I got Nelson Mandela and Mother Teresa and Bill Clinton. And then, a way to think about this is, Randy, it's just patterns. Everything is patterns. So if you want to think about, like I have 5 kids and 5 grandkids. I have a 50-year-old daughter and I have an almost 4-year-old daughter now. So I have quite a spread. I adopted my first 3 kids when I was very young. And I look at them today and I think, okay, the world is changing so rapidly. We're at the base of the change. We're not even at the acceleration of the change. And in the next, say 10 years minimum, but even 5 years, there'll be more change that's happened in the history of mankind between nanotechnology, obviously from AI, obviously from robotics, right? So many things that are coming here. So a lot of jobs are going to be disrupted depending on whose studies you read, 40, 50% of the jobs. So how do I make sure my kids and grandkids can do well, or you and I can do well, no matter what happens in the world? I think you need 3 skills. Skill 1, you get good at the science of, or just the recognition of patterns. Everything's patterns, history's patterns, financial patterns, company patterns. What you don't get angry all the time. You don't smoke all the time, or you don't drink all the time. You do those things when you're bored, or when you're triggered by sadness, or when you feel alone. So once you understand patterns, you have less fear because the world is in chaos anymore. And so I really started to get good at studying patterns of all sorts. And then the second skill, though, is if you can use the patterns, now you have power. You don't just know what's happening, you know how to use it. So that's what a great financial trader does. So I've worked with Paul Tudor Jones for 24 years, one of the greatest traders in history. It's all patterns. If you look at somebody who's great with music or singing, they know how to use the sound or the movement of the body to produce a result. A great director knows when to come in, when to come out, what to do with the music. But there's not unlimited patterns. And when you learn how to use them, it's like learning to play the other people's piano. But then the ultimate level is when you become a creator of patterns. That's when you're able to do things that no one else does. You become a master of your particular domain of focus. So I look at those 3 skill sets and I say, I want to make sure that I had that in as many areas as possible. And when I learned how to do that, that's when I started getting the calls, because I did it to me first. And then all of a sudden I get the phone call when the kid is suicidal, and knock on wood, I've never lost one, done thousands of them. And we've got, there's a documentary on Netflix called Tony Robbins, I'm Not Your Guru.
Great.
If you go there and watch it, you see it?
Two people. I mean,
yeah, it's mind-boggling. And what happens is you get to see people, but you see them 5 years later too, and what's happened to them, which is pretty amazing because they're no longer suicidal, obviously.
One of them is actually now a life coach in Berlin.
That's right.
Which is incredible.
That's right. You've done your homework. So anyway, long story shortened, the bottom line is when I understood that, then that's how I started getting people like the President of the United States, or, somebody coming to me saying, what am I going to do? I remember I got a phone call in the middle of the afternoon one day. It's President of the United States, Bill Clinton, saying, they're going to impeach me in the morning. What should I do? And my first response was, could you call me sooner? It's tomorrow morning. But because I had no net, and I'd go like Serena Williams, she can't get back on the court. Her sister got killed and it's US Open. And I got to deliver it now. That having no net but also having developed enough patterns gave me a capacity to create patterns that produce results that people had never seen before. And then I started doing it in business. So now I have 114 companies. We do $9 billion in business now, and across all these different industries. I had no traditional college education in business. It was just all modeling. Jim Rohn taught me success leaves clues. That if someone is successful, not for a day or a week or a month or a year, but a decade or more, they're not lucky. They're doing something different than you. So figure out what that is. And so most of my books are that. Like I wanted to help people financially after 2008. I was pissed off. I knew a lot in that area. But I'm like, okay, let me interview 50 of the smartest financial people in the world. And they're all different, but let's extract what do they have in common. And my billionaire clients loved it, but the average person loved it. It's a New York Times #1 bestseller and millions of copies sold because people could take it and actually change their life. Did the same thing with Life Force. Interviewed 150 of the greatest regenerative medicine doctors in the world, Nobel Prize winners. Because right now, the breakthroughs that happen today on average take 17 years from the time of the breakthrough to your clinician will start to talk to you about it. I was like, I want to blow off that 17 years. So let me write the book and empower people and show them what's happening with stem cells and exosomes and all these different technologies. And so because of that, I'm able to expand so rapidly because I'm good at pulling out those patterns. And then I know how to put them in a format that makes people really change and has fun doing it. Because I believe that, look, we're not in an information culture anymore. The information society died a long time ago. There's too much information. You're drowning in information and starving for wisdom. But we are an entertainment culture today. So you got to capture people's attention. And most people have a long attention span. I got to hold them for 12 hours or 13 for 4 or 6 days when they wouldn't sit for a 3-hour movie someone spent $300 million on and they're a stadium of 20,000 people. I got to get the guy at the top to be engaged. I've learned how to do that. It's a skill set to be able to do that. But it came from learning all these patterns. So I entertain them first, get them have the greatest experience, laughter, joy, fun, playfulness, tears sometimes. But then that gives me right for the second E and EQ. I educate them. I give them tools that I have modeled from the very best on earth that work, they're proven, and that are cutting edge. And then they get results. And then while they're there, I empower them to practice with real human beings and see what works and doesn't. So they don't just leave there uncertain. So that's why, one of the reasons why so many people get such lasting results is because we have a process and we do it for everything. We're teaching finance or relationship or how to shift yourself psychologically, emotionally, or how to shift your body. We still use that kind of secret sauce to make it happen.
I first heard your name from my speech therapist. I think it was 14, 15 years old. And he had done something called the Firewalk, which was invented by a woman named Molly Turkin. And she had taught you it the year before.
Well, it wasn't invented by Tony Robbins. It's been around for thousands of years.
Yeah. So she showed it to you, I think. And 1.5 million people have been through the Firewalk. And I thought, gosh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then Unlimited Power came out and changed my life.
I'm touched that it did. How old were you when they were reading it?
I was a freshman at Michigan, University of Michigan. I thought, just thinking about my speech and just sorry.
Don't be sorry. I'm really touched that it moved you so much.
Oh, stop.
And I find the only place that you should never have sadness or any embarrassment out of tears, because water out of the eyes is one of the few places liquids can leave your body publicly and be okay.
Yeah, I mean, well, I could. And it was, I worked so hard to learn how to.
The other Kleenex ram was up in here. I'm really touched. I'm good. I'm really touched, Andy.
I'll leave these here.
Down here, sweat.
I suffered for so long, learned how to speech, and we go to McDonald's, so I learned how to say, "Can I have a hamburger?" I mean, it was just a lot of work every night, and I thought, I worked so hard to do that. I was a good student. Now it's something I can control.
Yeah, I understand.
The hardest worker. I mean, I graduated top 1% of my class at Michigan, and just worked my ass off.
Yeah,
and that book, there were two things in that book that, from the same story which you've already told, that really made an impact on me. First of all, is your boldness 2 years before you wrote that book, when you went and said, I can improve your shooting by 50%. You had no training in pistol shooting. You never held a gun or shot a gun before, which is just mind-boggling. I'm like, God, how the fuck is that possible?
Yes.
And then the fact that you did it, and it really said, it's the power of the mind. And
Yes.
So much of my success today is really just thinking about things, I think, in a different way than most people. I mean, we'll talk about preparation in a minute here. And I think, there's good preparation, there's great preparation. And then if you think of the world's tallest building with the spire, is very thin air. It's like a pin at the top of that.
Yeah.
And it really, like, that pin reminds me of the focus that you talked about. And it also talked to me about how to get to that focus, and that anybody can do it.
Yeah.
It really changed my life.
Wow. I'm really touched to hear that. That's beautiful. Well, you've had an amazing life. I'm sure you've shared on air, but I've done my homework on you too. I mean, company founded, what is it, 25% of the internet, 30% of the internet goes through it, $19 billion company, and all the other companies you built, your passion for beaches. And so I'm so touched. But you know what I really respect about you, Randy, and I find true is some of the most successful people in the world had pain initially that drove them because it wasn't easy for them, so they'd overcome it. It's like you look and say, how is it somebody you can give them all the love, support from a family, all the education, economic well-being, and they spend their life going in and out of rehab, and somebody else, life steps all over them, and somehow they develop a hunger to do more, to be more, to give more, to share more. And you obviously have that, and you lived your life that way. So when I agreed to this interview, because I saw the results that you created, because I have great respect for that, but I guessed or hallucinated, I didn't know, I guessed that you probably had a pretty rough being. Now, you don't have to have a rough being to have that hunger. Yeah. But like I said earlier, would I really feed 1 billion people if I was well fed? Maybe I fed 100,000 people. I don't know. Maybe I fed 10,000. Maybe I fed 2. But I think it's important for people to know what you just experienced, that the worst of times really is designed to be the best of times, but it's our job to use it, not let it use us. Most people today, our culture today reinforces people for being a victim more than being a victor. If you're a victor, you must have abused someone. You must have taken advantage. If you're a victim, well, look at all this love and attention comes your way. And it's an upside down world right now. It was generated a good portion by social media where nothing is really true, where people alter the way they look so they look better than they are, and then makes people insecure all the time because they're worried about, what if people find out I'm not who I project myself to be? The easiest thing in the life is to be yourself. And your vulnerability right now, I just honor and respect. I can go up into tears at the edge of the lap about something that matters. I don't think that's unmasculine. I think it's just sincere. So, and your sincerity comes from the level of intensity of what you face. But look at the muscles you built because of that. So you had speech difficulties. So just to even say, order a burger, to where you are today is this incredible entrepreneur building these businesses, doing your podcast.
Yeah.
I'm
teaching others now, teaching others to get over their pain.
That's great.
Yeah.
Me too. That's why I'm still doing this. So, I don't have this shit at this stage of my life, right? I'm going to be 65 in a few weeks, and my wife's like, what the hell? It's like, we're ever going to slow down? I said, probably not, honey. She goes, I love you so much, you crazy person. But I'm crazily driven because now it's no longer the pain that drives me. That's how it started.
Yeah.
And anger at some points was driving me, but those sources of fuel don't last. What will keep you driven is not so much push as pull. Push is you're trying to make yourself doing something. Pull is that you've got an obsession for something. You want to serve something more than yourself, and you disappear. When we think only about ourselves, we're always messed up. Anxiety and fear and all this, you hear all these kids today talking about, mental, what's the word they use for it? Not mental wellness. What do they call it? Mental challenges or whatever, and wanting to soothe themselves. They know they need to become stronger, and they don't know it. And it's not their fault. They've grown up in an environment where you can push a button and get whatever you want in 2 seconds on your phone. You don't even have to walk across the street, get the food. God forbid, they'll deliver it to your house. That's the world we're in. But the world goes through seasons. And the season you experience early in life of being really challenged, every 18 to 20 years, the season changes. And so we have seasons of our life. 0 to 21 is springtime. It's easy to grow. Even if you had to work like I did to help your family, still, if it was a war, I wasn't going to war yet, right? You're being fed information, being supported. 22 to 42 is kind of like the summer when you get tested. You walk in thinking you're invincible. You're 21 years old, you're going to be president of the United States, you're going to be a multi-billionaire, and you're going to have 100 relationships simultaneously, and everyone's going to be happy. Then you're turning 32, 33, 34, 35, and you're like, shit, I can't even manage one relationship effectively, and I'm not a billionaire. What the hell's going on? You get humbled. but you're the soldier of society. If during that time, 22 to 42, there's a war, you're going to war, not the people younger and older, right? And so that's the area of life that's the most challenging for most people. That's the area of life where there was the most struggle probably for you in your youth and those stages. You get to 43 to 63, that's fall. That's the reaping time. If you worked hard in the spring and summer, you're going to reap. That's like when it's a fall economy, everybody makes it. If somebody wants to give you a loan and because you got a pulse, you don't even have a job, they want you to buy a piece of real estate, they're willing to do it. We all know those days. That happens every 20 years, like cycles, like clockwork, 18 to 20 years, 17 to 20 years. Then what happens? Then after reaping and having your most power, we're now at this stage of your life, how old are you now? 56. So at this stage of your life, my bet is you can do more with your pinky than when you work 20-hour days. You still work 20-hour days, but now you're producing that much more, right? Same for me. But when you get to that stage, you reap, or you weep in the fall if you didn't do the work in the early seasons. And you obviously worked. But I'm here to tell you, my dear friend, what's coming. Because I wouldn't have believed this. You go 64 to 84, 64 to 104, 64 to 120, the oldest living humans, wherever you live to. That's the winter season, but that's the season where there's the most joy in my entire life. Because one, you have relationships that are people you've loved for 30 years, 40 years. I mean, there's nothing that comes close to that. You know who you are. When you're in 20s to 40s, maybe even 50s, you're still trying to prove to yourself or maybe others who you are. You get to this point and it's like, it's not that you don't care, but you don't give a shit. It's like, I know who the fuck I am. And I'm not here for everybody. I'm not the right style for it. I don't pretend to be. But I know my shit and you know your stuff. I respect you, respect me. That's cool. It's a different world. There's none of that push anymore. It's just, I want to serve. Instead of like giant mission statements, I used to have, now my mission is really simple. How can I help? Right? So it's like someone calls me and they got somebody that's suicidal. A kid is having a learning problem. A business needs to be turned around. And because I've spent a lifetime accumulating those answers, besides what I do in all my companies, individually, I do that. And it makes my life feel fully alive. So as long as you keep your health, that stage is the happiest. It is the most fulfilling. And most people think it's not going to be. So that's why I want to plant a seed with everybody who's listening.
So speaking about health, we all have had health challenges. Not everybody, but I've had big ones. I know you've had a big one. And I want to talk about two separate events. You had a girlfriend. Why don't you talk about her mom, Jenny?
Yeah.
And how that influenced how you thought about health in the future. I know you read a book that no longer is kind of a book you would recommend today. And then when you're 31 years old, you're on your way to coaching Saudi Arabian sheik who's paying you $1 million. You're getting your helicopter's license.
Yeah.
You get some phone calls. And some of our best ideas come in the shower. I mean, I like to sing in the shower. I'm horrible. But you had an epiphany in the shower. So tell us about what happened and what came out of your health scare.
Well, two things that I think you're alluding to. One is when I was just a young kid, I was very, very driven. And, I achieved a good deal of success at a very young age. But then in my unconscious, my brain would say, like, how does this happen so fast? I mean, I'm working my guts out, but still, this is amazing. And my brain would go, well, you're going to die young. And then I got obsessed with cancer. Some people in our family died of it. I watched them wilt away. And so it was very vivid to me. And so unconsciously, it's like, I don't want to die of cancer. Maybe this is all happening now because I'm not going to be here very long. And then one day my girlfriend's mom came home and she was diagnosed with cancer. She had it in her feminine organs and also a lump in her breast. And they told her she had 9 weeks to live. And I've always been the person that's like, there's always a solution. Well, for me, I probably wouldn't have done as much. We usually do more for people we love than we do for ourselves. And so I just geared up. There was no fear in me. I was like, we're going to solve this. And so I went and grabbed all these books and I read like 7 books. And I got this one book called One Answer to Cancer, which wouldn't be the number one book I'd pick now, but it was written by a dentist who had pancreatic cancer, which is the most aggressive, and got rid of it in less than 90 days. They thought he was going to die within 6 weeks. And so it was all about how to detox the body and getting certain essentials into the system and so forth. And so I said to her, look, the doctor says you're going to die. Why don't you read this and see, why don't you apply this? You got nothing to lose. And then they said they wanted to do exploratory surgery on her. And she came to me at, I think it was 19 at the time, and say, should I do the surgery? I was like, I can't tell you should do the surgery. I'm wrong, you die. But it was me, they shrunk sizably. Like you could see it protruding for her here, and she could feel it protruding. And now she couldn't feel the protrusions. And the doctor did agree that it had gotten smaller. And I said, it was me. I think I'd wait if it keeps getting smaller. But the doctor convinced her just to be safe. And he dug around and he literally found something the size of the top of her little baby fingernail. And the doctor said it was a miracle. And she said, it is a miracle, but let me tell you what I did. And he's like, no, it's a miracle. It was a spontaneous remission. She said, yeah, but let me tell you. And so he wouldn't listen. So she went around to churches. But what it did to me was, she's still alive today. She's in her 80s, right? What it did for me is it made me no longer have fear. It's like, okay, there's a way to handle this. And I wouldn't have probably come across it. I would have been in my own pity pot probably because I was so afraid or I've been so fearful I wouldn't have found it. And so I became very much health oriented. And then your example was, when I got diagnosed at one point, I went to see this guy. I won't bore you with the long story, but I went to see this doctor and I'm a pilot. And so you have to get certified, right? I'm a helicopter pilot and a fixed wing pilot. And he decided that perhaps I had a disease without telling me. And he did these tests. So he calls me. And I'm like, tell him to send the report. I'm flying to south of France, And I got home one night. There's a note on my door. And it says, the doctor says it's an emergency. You have to call him. So then your brain goes crazy, right? So the first time I'm like, could I have cancer? I've done all the right things, but I fly a lot of radiation. Your head goes crazy. It's like, stop. Because I tried to call him. There's no answer because it's 1 a.m. by the time I got home. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to worry. It's like, a coward dies 1,000 deaths. A courageous person once. If there's a problem, I'm going to handle it. I went to sleep. I got up the next day and the guy tells me, you have a tumor in your brain. I said, what? Because you have a tumor in your brain. You have a pituitary tumor. I said, how could you possibly know this? I did some extra blood tests because I had a hallucination and that tumor is creating a huge amount of growth hormone in your body. I said, how'd you figure that out? My hands are bigger than your head. My feet are size 16. He goes, no, you have gigantism. He said, there is an active tumor in there. I guarantee. I said, how do you know that? He goes, well, I did this blood test. I said, explain it to me. He goes, well, it's really complex. I said, I'm a smart person. Explain it to me. He couldn't explain it to me because he didn't know how it worked. He just knew the answer. So he wanted me to come in and immediately do, an MRI, and then he wanted to go do surgery. And I'm like, I'd like to get a second opinion. And I said, will you recommend anybody? And he didn't have a good bedside manner. And I wasn't a nice person in that state. I was angry because I was shocked. And so he said, find it yourself. So long story shortened, I went to Sloan Kettering and I found this doctor. And sure enough, I had a tumor in there. And it actually caused this massive growth spurt, 10 inches in a year. But then it infarcted, which means it swallowed up a good portion of itself. I still have it to this day. But what the guy wanted to do was surgery anyway. And I said, well, side effects are what? Well, death, really low energy. Well, energy's my life. So then I went to another doctor. Well, the doctor's going to send me to Switzerland for shots that they had. And you don't have to do a shot every 6 months. And he said, I think that's what we can do. And I said to him, Doc, it was his last day of practice. He was 72. He's the best in the country. And he goes, I said, this guy wants to cut me. You want to drug me? He goes, the baker wants to bake. The butcher wants to butcher. I said, but what if I did nothing? I mean, my heart valve's the right size. There's nothing off except I grew fast. And I said, what if it's a gift from God? Like, he goes, well, it does make you repair quicker because you got a lot of growth hormone. And he goes, well, I just wouldn't take a chance just to be certain I do it. Well, the drug I didn't take, the FDA outlawed because it caused cancer. I found out a year later. So I missed a bullet. And then I finally, after I think it was 8 doctors, I got a doctor that says, you do have a huge amount of growth hormone. You get about $1,200 a month, which is what a bodybuilder would be paying at that time for this. He goes, it's going to make you restore really well. As long as you monitor it, you don't have to do anything. So I'm still, I still monitor it, but it's about every 3 or 4 years. I haven't seen any change. And, I've got a body that I also biohack the hell out of it. But, if you believe the true age measurements, I'm going to be 65 in chronological age, but I'm 52 in biochemical age, which is nice.
At some point, people realize that they're better than different people. I remember I was playing golf. I'm a horrible golfer. Kaiser, by the way, best place on earth. I love Kaiser, yes. And I'm playing with this guy, and I'm a horrible golfer. And we have I have a pro golfer who came in as a friend, and we're all playing golf. And I'm just, I lost 40 balls that round. And it was interesting to hear the conversation between those two guys. And the golfer said to this player who had been in 8 All-Star games, 10 All-Star games, he said, at what point did you know you were better than everyone else and 99% of people weren't going to make it? So when did you know that you had this incredibly special gift that you could motivate, inspire hundreds of millions of people around the world, which you have. I mean, I put up on my social media, I'm doing Tony Robbins, this is my dream podcast. And
thank you.
I got hundreds of DMs. I posted today on my story. I'm so pumped. I'm going to Tony Robbins' house to do the show. And it just fucking exploded.
That's awesome.
I mean, you've influenced so many people. When did you know you had this gift?
Well, first of all, I'm complimented. Thank you. I think my gift is different than people think it is. I think my gift is the depth of my caring. I know that might sound corny to some people, but when people ask my wife, what's something about Tony that nobody knows? And she says, how much he prepares. Because, I could get up and do a 4-day seminar for 12 hours a day, without thinking at this stage. But every audience I organize, I do interviews for people in advance. I find out what they're after, what they're doing. When I do my Date with Destiny, I got 5,000 people and they do a 10 to 20 page document. I read them all. I mean, the ones they turn in. Of course, some people turn them in the night before and I'm in the night doing it. But I'm obsessed with giving my all every time I can serve. And when I'm up there, I think that's my secret. I remember a friend of mine, good buddy now, came to a seminar years and years ago. And he was like, what is this bullshit? It's positive thing, crap, this guy up there. In those days, it was the 80s. You wear a suit and tie while you're in a seminar and it's, I'm by the fire. It's 110 degrees, sweating. And I was on stage and I was, I get people to change their bodies because that's how you change your mind. Just try to change your mind. It doesn't do shit. You got to change the physiology first. So I change their bodies. And part of what we do is we have people extend up and rise up and jump and all these different things. And I remember he was like, he was with a guy that was an NFL Pro Bowler, and the other guy he came with was a billionaire. It's like, I'm a billionaire. I'm going to do this jumping shit. And the guy's, and he goes, 15 minutes later, we're all jumping because he said, we watched you, and we watched the sweat go from here all the way down to the end of your tie. And it was obvious, like you were giving every ounce of your soul. So if you could do that crap, I could jump, right? And so I think I'm able to reach people because you can't fake that for 4 days, 12, 13 hours a day, and they know they don't have to do it. Right? They can feel it. So people open when you're there to truly serve them, not serve yourself. And I think that's my biggest one. The second thing is I'm obsessed with strategies about how to get results faster. And they work because they're the best. They're not the best because I created them. I modeled the best combinations. So when did I know that? I don't know. Probably shortly after I was working with the president, and I'm 31 years old, 32, and I'm sitting with the president of the United States. We were in Camp David, and it's Bill Clinton at that time, and he's wanting my advice, and I'm listening to him, and I go, like, this guy's the president of the United States, and man, he is really messed up, and he's the most powerful man on earth. And so you begin to realize we're all just people. But my skill set kept growing, and when I started being able to do anything from turn around the army to speak in any country and take people 12, 13 hours a day and have the impact, obviously I couldn't miss that I had that skill or the interventions that I'd done. And then, we all have some sense of inner pride. And, it's funny for me today because I'll have young bucks come up to me and say, hey, remember my name because, someday, I'm going to be where you are. And I always tease them, go, gosh, that's fantastic. Because when you get where I am, you'll be where I was. Because I'm not going to stop growing. So let's do it. So I love that sense of growth and competition as well. So, but I don't look at it as like I have this great gift. I look at it like people have gifts. And my job is to help them uncover them. Not I have a great gift. The gift is just loving on them and having a skill to figure out how to get there.
I came from the California fires.
I was there on Tuesday and Wednesday. I was there for business and some friends, and so 2 friends lost their homes. One of them hurt on Pacific.
I mean, it's terrible. It's just like, again, talk about getting emotional. Just most of our friends lost their home. I got a call from the principal of school. She calls all the time, right? And so I see the school pop up, and I never answer the phone. It's a recording, and I only have my phone on. I'm writing a book on preparation, extreme preparation, so I don't answer my phone in the morning. And my son was in town. I was trying to coordinate. He's home from college, so I had my phone on there. I see it, didn't answer. Calls again and said, "Oh, we're evacuating, meeting at school. There's a fire. Come look out." And I look out my window. I live in Brentwood. My office is in Brentwood. I look in the palace. I'm like, holy fucking shit. Most fires, you just see the smoke, right? This fire, it was black, a black tornado. that didn't stop. So
I was there. I saw it.
I was like, oh my God. So I rushed down to my car, got in a parking garage, and then we're about 3 miles away from school. And so Sunset, I'm driving down Sunset like a maniac. So as everyone else, double honking, crossing the double yellow lines, parked, 5 blocks away, sprinted into the school, right? I mean, you just look at the fire, you can see it expanding, and it's just sheer pandemonium, right? You got the kids crying, you got the parents, you hug your kids, and you run out of there. And then
how old is your one?
She is 8. I have 5 kids, so she's in 2nd grade at Pally, and then we have a 4.5-year-old in preschool. Preschool is in Santa Monica, so they closed the school later, but we had to get to Pally. Yeah. And 6 hours later, the school burned down, and 2 hours later, our first friend, their home burned down. So many people are suffering so bad. All of our friends, 90% of our friends lost everything. Their home, their belongings. Thank God they're all safe, which is most important. You said that crisis is a gift. What would you tell all of those families today who are in that situation, who are suffering immensely? What should they be telling their mind to help them feel better?
Well, I know a lot of them are very angry, as they have every right to be, because the government has not done its part. And without playing politics one side or the other, to empty the Roosevelt was empty in Pacific Palisades. They lied and said they just ran out of,
right.
The governor was saying they ran out because of the use. It's not true. They emptied it in the summer.
Right.
So there's just some stupid things that brought that about. So I understand the anger, but in the end, you still got to take care of you. You can vote differently in the future, but right now, what do you do? Well, I had a home in California that also burned down years ago. It was my dream home. I built it into everything I wanted. It had all the memorabilia of my life. It had, I grew up in an age where there weren't digital pictures. So all the pictures are gone. All my favorite, rare books, all the inscriptions, everything that had sentimental value was gone. But in the midst of me feeling this grief and frustration, I realized this is not going to serve to stay in this place. I need to be a role model for my kids. I have 5 kids, and I was 4 at the time. And I need to show people how to deal with this, because this is something that's unfortunately common. We're all going to experience extreme stress. I don't care how rich you are, I don't know how good a person you are, how religious you are. Everyone in their lifetime is going to experience extreme stress, as you have, and as I have, and probably more than once. Aren't you guys glad you came to this positive conversation? But it's true.
But this is we're all going to. I mean, hearing.
Yeah, but we're all going to have a house burned down, or we're going to lose a job, or a COVID type thing is going to shut our business down unfairly, or you're going to have someone in your family who gets a terminal disease, or you're going to get a terminal disease. I mean, every one of us is going to experience extreme stress. The question is, what do you do when you have extreme stress? And the stupid answer, but it's an accurate answer, is when you're going through hell, you got to keep going. And the better answer is, when you push yourself through it and you get to the other side, you get 3 amazing benefits that will affect your life forever in a good way. 1, you discover how strong you really are. Because if it's extreme stress and you don't give up and you don't succumb and you keep moving forward, you go on what's called the hero's journey. We've all heard about it. All the stories of mankind can be put into one fundamental story. What is the hero's journey? You're living your life. All these people are living life, their ordinary, normal, day-to-day life, and boom, something comes and smashes it. The smash is a call to adventure, a call to a different world than you would have entered into if it hadn't happened. You don't know what it is. You don't even know why it is. It looks like it's for terrible reasons. But as I said earlier, what if everything's happening for you, not to you? Doesn't look like it. I'm not saying it's fair. Who said life was fair? But it's going to lead to something new. It'll lead to an expansion. And so when that happens, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, you can take anyone. They're living a normal life, and then something happens, a tornado, there's a landing, or his parents get killed, something disruptive. And then usually most of us don't want to go on the journey because it's uncertain. We just stay upset with where things are. But eventually, you're usually pushed into going on that journey. And when you do, what will happen is you will meet, when our home burned down, my first thing was, okay, we lost things. I valued a lot of those things, but things are not the same as my family. Losing things is not losing family. This is a gift. And so I had to turn it into gratitude, because when you're angry and fearful, you can't change squat. But gratefulness, you can't be angry when you're grateful, and you can't be fearful when you're grateful. So then what did that lead to? It led to us building a new home in a different place. It led to meeting new friends. and made me new mentors and led to new decisions to now here I am in my favorite home here in Florida. I never would have left the Del Mar Castle. It was a castle built out of pieces of castles in Europe. On top of the hill was my ultimate place for my family. It's not even close to what I have the privilege and blessing of having in my life today. I love where I am and what I'm doing. But I would have never known that because I would have stayed there, bar having to change. And I think that happens to a lot of us. So, by the way, when you go on that journey and meet these new mentors and meet new friends, you'll develop new skills and then you'll have new battles. It's not like it's all just easy. The battles with the external, the battles with what's going on inside of you. And when you conquer and slay your dragons, you come home the hero and you're able to give to other people, not on book knowledge, because you've lived it. And everyone can feel when you've lived it versus you're just talking bullshit or talking something you thought of, right, or read about. And by the way, when you're done with that and you've helped those people, it'll happen again. That is life. So what I tell people is right now, you've got to cultivate gratitude. It's not positive thinking bullshit. It's because to live in pain will not make it better in any way. You have to make that shift of gratefulness that you didn't lose it. I mean, it is a miracle that there are, 13 people that died out of that when there's 10,000 homes that are gone and all the schools and all the, shopping centers and all those things that are out there. That's an incredible gift. It looks like, a war zone. I mean, I was there. I know what you're talking about. So that's number one. But here's what happens. You find out how strong you are. Here's the second thing you learn when you go through hell. You discover who your real friends are versus your Facebook friends, because there's the ones that show up and are there for you. And thirdly, you develop an immunity to future challenges because you develop muscle in dealing with this issue that you wouldn't have. It's like, how do you build a muscle? You don't pick a light weight and do 100 reps. That will do nothing. You get a way you can barely lift and you could push through and you're trying to do 8 reps and you can't do 1 more and the trainer says 4 more, and you do 3 more and you get more growth there than any other time. This is building us emotionally and spiritually. It is not fair. It is not just. It shouldn't have happened. And it has, so you better use it so it doesn't use you. And then the second thing I do is give them tools. And so we can announce it here. I haven't made a public announcement yet. There is a tool called New Calm that I've used for multiple years, and a lot of people with PTSD use it, but also just average achievers or average people, either one, will use it so they can calm their nervous system because most of us have a lot of stress. And it also has a great sleep mode and a great wake-up mode. I've used it for years. It's one of the best tools available. I don't know what it is. I think it's $100 a year, whatever. I'm buying a year's worth of it. And I'm buying 6 months. I'm getting them to donate 6 months. And we're going to give a year to anyone in Southern California that wants it for a year, no strings attached. Then there's a skill you may have heard of called tapping. It's based on understanding meridians in the body. When things happen down, for example, in Sandy Hook, it's a brutal situation. We went down there and turned families around using this 3,000 scientific studies. It's a very simple tool. So we built an app so millions of people can do this. I'm doing that for people for a year. And then I'm already doing something I do once a year, which is when COVID happened, another huge, unbelievable event that affected the whole world, and people are locked in their homes. I was used to doing all these stadiums, right? 15, 20,000 people. And they shut down every stadium around the world, London, Australia, everywhere in the US. So it's like, I built a studio and I said, okay, people are stuck at home. They're depressed. Depression's going through the roof. People are suicidal. It's like, I got to help people where they live. So even though I wouldn't have done it ever, I've never said I'm going to do this in people's homes when I'm used to a rock and roll concert of a building. To give you an idea what it's like in those seminars, like Pat Riley, who owns the Miami Heat, was one of the greatest coaches in history. I remember the first time he came to these seminars with me, he's like, this is like the 7th game of the NBA championship, only instead of 2 hours, it's 12 hours for 4 days. It's like the energy is unbelievable. So that's what I'm used to. How am I going to do that in somebody at home in their bedroom or their living room or their garage watching me on a little screen, right? But because there was no other choice, I came up with the way to do it. I built this studio, 55 high ceilings, 20-foot size LED screens, all around me 50 feet, 0.67 resolution, so I can see more than I can see in you right now, this car far apart from me. This is magnified. I went to the guys who run Zoom, and I said, I can't have 1,000 people, I need 25,000 people. And then I said, I got to be able to bring them up to see them. I built software, so instead of clapping your hands in a seminar, you might clap. Here, you shake your phone, it sends an electrical signal. When one person does it, you don't hear it. But when 25,000 people do it, it's like thunder. So it produces the same experience. So then I said, okay, people are stuck at home. They're fearful. Let me eliminate every obstacle to them getting goodness in their life. Let's eliminate no travel. They can't. So we're going to do it in their home or their office, wherever they are. Let's eliminate money. I'm not going to charge anything for it. Let's make an immersion, because that's what works. Learning a language a little bit at a time, you don't speak it. Drop you in Rome for 90 days, you're just going to be speaking the language. So I use immersion, but let's do immersion that doesn't freak them out, like 3 hours a day for 3 days. And let's really give them the skills to change their energy, their body, their emotion, their business, instead of a bunch of New Year's resolutions that don't get followed through on. And so we announced it, we put it out to people, and I developed these tools to keep people engaged. And we have people from 193 countries that attend. The last one I did, 1.2 million people in it from every country in the world. And we're doing it again this year. And I only do it once a year. And so whether you're in Southern California having challenges, you could join that also. But people from everywhere in the world go. And again, it's not partially free, it's totally free. It's called the Time to Rise Summit. So if you go to timetorisesummit.com, timetorisesummit.com, you can sign up. There's no fee for it. And you can do it at home or at the office. You do it with your family or your friends. But the kinds of results that people get are unbelievable. And I don't charge for it, but I say, if the one value I want back from you, for you, is if you're going to do this, we're going to give it to you. I want you to do an assignment tonight. Give an assignment each day. And the transformations, and they post it on Facebook, the transformations are unbelievable. And then you have a community of 1 million people who are all hungry and driven to make their life better and helping each other. So it becomes, that's how I start every year now. So anyone could do that. If you're watching, I hope you'll do. That's why I'm doing a bunch of podcasts right now. I want people to know about it. It's coming up January 30th, 31st, and February 1st. January 30th through February 1st. You can attend from anywhere in the world. Again, no charge. So go to that experience. But the people in Southern California, even more so. I'm going to give them those tools for them. That's for everybody else. I can't do it for everybody. And they could also go to that event. And I can promise you they'll be turned around. It doesn't mean it'll all be easy. It just means they'll be on the path to having what they really want.
Let's talk about a couple of things that make people successful. We've talked about preparation. I'm writing a book called Extreme Preparation. It's been one of the hallmarks of my career. You do a shit ton of preparation as well. Talk to us about Ray Dalio. And you said something in the book. I've been teaching this and coaching this for a long time. It really helps take the impossible and makes it possible. It helps improve your win rate dramatically.
Yes.
And you can do, if you're, so many things I've heard, I can't get that job. Even if someone's firing 40,000 people, there's a job for the person who does the preparation. Yeah. You talk about a concept called pitch and catch. I've never thought about it that way, but tell us what you did for Ray Dalio.
Well, you don't just do it for Ray Dalio, you do it for everybody. But
you do it for, yeah. And by the way, I've done a lot of podcasts now. I think around 150 podcasts. Your team was the most thorough in terms of questions, scheduling, minutes. It was great. I'm like, hey, your team speaks my language. I love this.
That's good. Well, no, I wrote this book, Money Master the Game, and I wrote it because in 2008, as you remember, the world melting down. But I was coaching Paul Tudor Jones at the time, one of the top 10 traders in the history of the world. This is a guy who in 1987, the stock market dropped 20% in one day, the largest still percentage drop in a day. He made 100% for his clients. Genius. So when this was all happening, I couldn't believe it. And I couldn't believe afterwards nothing was done, and that the punishment for the people that almost destroyed the financial system was give them more money. So I said, I don't have a lot of skills, but one skill I have is the ability to get to the best people. And I'm good at modeling. So let me interview the very best. So in preparation for those, like Ray Dalio is one of the greatest, hedge fund traders in the history of the world. There's nobody in his class. And so I prepared for him, I think 3.5, 4 hours the night before. I prepared weeks before, but I went even deeper. I knew every part of what was going in. So I went in as typical. I'm supposed to have a 45-minute interview, and it went 3 hours. And the same thing happened with Jack Bogle. Jack Bogle actually wrote a quote that says, Tony Robbins came by for a 20-minute interview, and 3.5 hours later, it was the most piercing interview of my entire career, right?
I get 3 hours today. I'll come drive with you in the car. We'll take the equipment wherever you're going here.
No worries. Anyway, what it allowed me to do when I sat down with them is what I call pitch and catch, which means he'd say something, I knew what it was, and I could add some value back. We went back and forth. It built a great rapport, and we're good friends today because of it. But one of the questions I asked him at the time was, what is the single most important investment principle, all the things you've learned that people should know? And he said, Tony, that's a great question. I struggled with this for years, and I finally came up with what I call the holy grail of investing, which is the title of the book that I just came out with. And it was based on what he taught me. And he said, Tony, if you can find 8 to 12 uncorrelated investments, you reduce your risk by 80% and you increase your upside. That's wild. Now, that sounds wonderful on paper, but when you go to do it, it's something else. And then I was at the JP Morgan conference. They have a alternative investment conference where you got to be a billionaire to go. And I'm one of the speakers, and Ray's right before me. And somebody asked him some questions and kind of led to a similar question, like, what's the most important to remember? And he said, the Holy Grail, same thing. And every head in the world, which had not written a single note the entire day, dropped down and wrote it down. So it's like, I need to realize even sophisticated people miss this one. They may know it intellectually, but they got it. So then how do you do that? Like, it's hard because you say, okay, stocks and bonds aren't correlated usually. You know, stocks are going up, bonds are a different price point. That's usually the balance. But during tough times, they get aligned. And so you have to have sophisticated tools to do it. And then I started studying history and saying, okay, your asset allocation, where you put your money at risk, small risk, larger risk, upsides, et cetera, your philosophy of investing is the single most important thing. Every one of the people I interviewed agreed on that. So I said, well, what is the asset allocation for the most successful people in the world? Well, ultra wealthy people have 46% of their assets in private equity and private credit. I'm like, yeah, but that's hard to get into. And then I started doing the homework, and I found in the last 37 years, there isn't a single stock market in the world that has beat average private equity. Now, I wrote this book, and I interviewed 12 of the masters of the universe, people that done 20% plus compounded for more than a decade or 2 decades, unheard of in the normal market. Because when things go down, they don't have to sell. So they're not stuck. And when things go down, they can buy. When things go up, they can sell. They have more flexibility. They don't have the timeline challenge that somebody who owns a stock may feel like they have. And so I started studying them, and I was like, here's the real numbers. The S&P 500, most people would invest in, or at the index, has gone up 10.7 over the last 37 years. It's pretty amazing, compounding. The average private equity, not these guys, has been 15.7. So if you could compound 50% faster, people don't understand what that means. If you put $1 million in the S&P 37 years ago and you never touched it, it's worth $42 million today. If you put $1 million in the same day, same amount of money in private equity, average private equity, it's worth $223 million today. So now here's the next problem. How does the average person get that? Well, I know you're familiar. There are things like a credit investor. The government doesn't give you access to all these investments. The best investments are reserved for people that already have money. It seems so unjust and unfair. I was squawking about it. I didn't do it, but somebody woke up in Congress. And last year, that's why I wrote the book. Last year, they came out with a new rule. Senate's got to confirm it this year. But the new rule is, look, you could get a lot of money by inheriting it. That doesn't mean you're a sophisticated investor. You could be a good businessman, but not a great investor. So why would we penalize people, say, if they have a certain amount of money? Let's give them a test to take. They can study for it. If they understand it, then anyone can have access to this. So imagine the compounding value to get your financial future when you can do this. And then there's one more thing I'll say, just because I know we're out of time. So I'm talking to this guy who was one of Paul Tudor Jones's associate partners before, and he broke off and started his own company. I'd helped him really grow his business quite a bit. And I was saying to him, private equity is great. And because of, guys like you and I, we have certain relationships and brand. And so we can get access to some of the best. But the amount you get, they're all sold out right away. It's so small that it wasn't going to alter my life in any way. So I was saying, man, it's like, how did you get in there? It's just, the very best is already sold out. And he goes, Tony, you helped me so much. I got to tell you where I put most of my money. I said, most of your money? He's a very sophisticated financial guy. I said, yeah. I said, where? He goes, there's this company in Houston, Texas. And I went, Houston? Not Singapore, London, New York, Connecticut, Houston? He goes, yeah. He said, they're off the beaten path, but they are brilliant. And here's what they've done. When you try and invest in private equity, you become what's called a limited partner. And as you know, you give them your money, and then they charge you 2% of your money, whether they make you money or not, and then they get 20% of the upside. And people are willing to do it because they're so successful. But it makes them very wealthy. If you look at the Forbes 400, you'll see which industry has the most billionaires. People think it's tech. It's not. They think it's real estate. It's not. They think it's entertainment. It's not. It's financial services. And it's specifically not hedge funds that go up and down. It's private equity. So I look at this and I'm like, okay, these guys are the masters of the universe and they're getting 2 and 20. He goes, Tony, they have a way for you not to try to get into a fund, but to own the firm. So think about, instead of betting on a horse, owning the racetrack. I'm like, you can do that? He goes, yes. And we've done it. They've done it with some of the, like Vista, if you're familiar with, some of the best companies in the world, $100 billion funds that have produced results that are incredible. So I went and I became a client, and then it turned out the founder of that company 20 years before it was a student of mine, like you, changed his whole life. And he's like, Tony, how do I get you involved? I said, I want to get involved. So I invested in the company. And then I wrote the book to let people know all these opportunities are available, like sports teams. If you want an asset that's not correlated, sports teams have done well in every market and every environment we've ever done, and they do better than the S&P, right? So I worked for a lifetime. I have those 5 rings back there, those all championship rings from different sports where I worked with a team, and some of them now I own. So I own a piece of the Dodgers, I own a piece of the Golden State Warriors, but I coach the Warriors. Well, it's the most fun experience you can imagine. It's something you really enjoy, but also the returns on average across all those sports are 14% compounded, not 10.7. And you own a monopoly. You own a business that's a legal monopoly. And who are your customers? Fans. That comes from fanatics. And they're multi-generational. And now they're not just sports teams, the entertainment value. I'll just give you one example. The Dodgers. My friend Peter Gerber bought the Dodgers. I get a chance to later on invest in them. He paid $2 billion for the Dodgers, 2.1, I think it was. And everybody in the news is saying, no one's paid over $1 billion. This is insane. They'll never make money.
$800 million more than the second bidder in that deal.
That's crap. And everybody's like, this is crazy. So I said, Peter, I know everybody's saying you're nuts. I know you're not nuts. You're one of those sly, sophisticated guys I know. What do you know? What are you going to do here? And he leans forward and he goes, I love a cliffhanger. He's a movie maker, right? He goes, wait 3 days. I want to make the announcement. Then you call me. We'll come over and celebrate. He announces 3 days later. If you own a sports team, NBA, like there's 32 teams, if I remember correctly, you get 1/32 of all the media coverage that's done nationally, internationally. It's huge. And the NFL, which is the first team to they were holding out. We just made a deal with them. We're now doing with the NFL. They get a check for $450 million at the end of every year just for their percentage of the league. Just that. But you get to keep your local rights. Peter sold the local rights for $7 billion and made $5 billion and profited in a day doing this. So you can get a small piece of a sports team, have the joy of that, have the benefit of that, and have something else that's not correlated to the stock market. So I'm passionate about giving people choices, and I'm so grateful that the government is finally waking up to not limit people who can participate.
Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Okay.
I have 2 hours more of questions, and I believe in life. You don't ask if you don't get. So I'm hoping to have the opportunity to come back and finish what we started. There's so much about there's so much about money that I want to talk to and advice. I'm going to ask you one more question before we hang up. Before we end the podcast.
Sure.
If you could give yourself one piece of advice to your 21-year-old self,
yes,
what would it be?
That's a very common question today. It's so interesting. People ask that all the time, and I've thought about it in multiple ways. I think Jim Rohn gave me a piece of advice when I was very young. One of those was me trying to understand, why my fathers, like I said, were struggling so much, even though they're good men. And he was the one who taught me that we're equal as souls, but we're not equal in the marketplace. You got to add more value. But he also taught me something else when I was really frustrated. He said, Tony, if you keep giving your all, your gifts will make room for you. And I think the same piece of advice. I mean, I know more today and everything else, but I think if you just keep moving forward, if you will not let anything stop you and you really focus on serving, because I really believe the only solution to long-term happiness is to get outside yourself. The human mind will always find something to be concerned about, pissed off about, worried about. But when you're serving, you're not there. There's something magical about finding something you care about more than yourself. Then you get that pull motivation we talked about instead of push. Push doesn't last, pull does. And if you've got that kind of drive, you're going to keep growing. And if you keep growing, you have plenty to give. And if you keep giving, you're going to have a meaningful life. In the end, that's what we all really want, is a life that's really full of meaning. And so mine is full of meaning because of my family, because of my kids and grandkids, but it's also for all my chosen family and friends and all the people I have the privilege to serve all over the earth. And I've been able to do it for multi-generations. I got friends that I knew when they're 40, they're now 82 and 83, and they're still crushing it. And so that generation, I have my generation that grew up with me. I'm 60. I have a generation of people that are 45 or 50 or 55 like you that started listening to me when they're 20, and then I've got 17-year-olds that are joining it. So the privilege and the blessing to be able to serve all these different people in different stages of life, and I have more to give now because I've lived so much life. And it's certain things you don't know without living them, no matter what you try and how to learn from other people. And so I'm excited about what the next 30 plus years, hopefully, if I live that long, will provide in terms of my ability to serve even more people. And I think that's what you got to do. If I were to finish, I'd say, Find something you care about more than yourself, because that's what's going to be the secret to your growth and your aliveness. Whether it's your family, it's your friends, it's your company, it's a nonprofit thing to you, it's a mission for you. If you can find that and find something that gives you that pull, your life is going to be one hell of an adventure.
When I started my show 3.5 years ago, I made a list of my top guests. You were number one.
Oh, I hadn't touched by that. Thank you.
So I'm grateful we're here. I'm grateful to you for making an influence in my life and so many more. And I want to shout out to Doug Evans for making this happen. It never would have happened without Doug.
That's right.
It's important to give credit to where credit is due. This has been a true joy.
Yes.
I'm grateful to you. Thank you very much. And I hope we do have a chance to get to know each other and sit down again.
You should come to an event. Have you ever been to an event?
No, I haven't been to an event. Well, I'll tell you a quick story, and I know we have to go. When I was an unhappy lawyer, I met a guy named Brian Metaboy.
Yes, I know Brian, of course.
And Brian, and so at some point, our company's going to go public, and Brian had heard about it, so he invites me to this thing at Peter Gruber's house.
Yes.
I get there, and I'm the only one there not in the business, the entertainment business, and everyone just the agent.
That was a movie mogul meeting for sure.
Armani suits, these young agents. I'm a tech guy, so I don't know if I had jeans on and a shirt like this. I'm looking around, and you got people doing jumping jacks.
Well, it wasn't jumping jacks. It's sort of.
No, they were doing jumping jacks in their suit. I was worried that they were going to rip their shirts. And I remember walking out of Peter's house again. Like I read your books. I have a book, Awaken the Giant from Within, first edition that I brought with me. It's a paperback. You can see it's got yellow pages that I've read a few times. And I honestly walked out again like. You had motivated me already. I'd read your first book, yes. and here it was. And so that was the only one I had been to. But I remember walking out of Peter's mansion, and I remember thinking, God, this house up off its foundation, a 20,000 square foot house on my pinky finger. When I got out of the car, I was so pumped. So
well, imagine doing that. We did that for like 2 hours at his house. That was years ago. But imagine being with 10, 15, 20,000 people and doing 4 days and nights that you get rewired. I want people to know that what we do here is not about thinking. Stanford did a study. We don't have time to talk about it, but people go through and they get treated for depression. That's what they were interested in. And 60% of people make no improvement. 40% of those people improve 50% on average. Some people get well, but most people are on drugs the rest of their life. And when they did the study with my group over 6 days with no drugs, no anything, 93% were no longer having depressive symptoms, 7% improved, 17% had suicidal ideation, meaning considering suicide going in, none of them afterwards. A year later, 71% reduction in negative emotions, 52% increase in positive emotions. So this is a conditioning process. We're discussing something which can be stimulating. But to get your results, you got to get it in your body. And that's why I still do events. So you've got to come to an event as my guest. And everyone, please join me for, go to timetorise.summit.com and you could do one from your home for a few hours a day. But if you get a chance, come to Unleash the Power Within. You be my guest. So we'll blow you away. You'll have the time of your life. All right?
I promise to come. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time. Randy, I wish you would have prepared, damn it. Now, Randy, I really am impressed and you've done your homework. Part about this meeting went long because you have so many details to talk about. But I really appreciate that because I'm an extreme preparation person as well. My wife will tell you I'm nuts. And then I don't use all of it, but your brain is awakened by all of it. And you have more choices to be able to serve somebody when you're there. It's like, think of it this way. It's like if you may have grown up with two different beliefs you were taught. So which one are you going to live by? You were taught, look before you leap. You're taught, he who hesitates is lost. Which one is going to guide you? Whichever one is more recently awakened in you. So when you prep, even if it's something it's bringing it into the forefront of your nervous system so that you're more likely to be able to make that difference. So I really honor you for doing that.